This video is made possible by Dashlane. Dashlane is a one-stop shop digital identity protection tool who go beyond just being an amazing password manager and provide identity protection, monitoring, restoration, and more. Visit dashlane.com/TodayIFoundOut and apply the promo code TodayIFoundOut for a 10% discount. So it turns out renouncing your citizenship to a given nation is generally a fairly simple affair in many regions of the world. It doesn't even usually cost that much. For example, in the UK, fittingly for a country stereotypically known for its aversion to social conflict, renouncing your citizenship can be done by mail and costs £272. In the US, it's a bit more expensive, jumping in price almost 400% in the last decade, up now to $2,350. The price hike was in response to the dramatic rise in people renouncing their citizenship starting in around 2010, which we're going to focus on in the bonus facts later. But as for the actual process, according to the US Department of State, outside of settling potential tax bills, affirming you're renouncing voluntarily and the like, which is pretty standard with most nations, in a nutshell, all one needs to do is appear in person before a US consular or diplomatic officer and sign an oath of renunciations. You'll then later receive a certificate of loss of nationality, signifying that you are no longer a US citizen. Now, if the person does not already have citizenship with another nation when they attempt to do this, the State Department employee will counsel the person on the many difficulties the individual will soon face if they choose to go through with renouncing their citizenship. You see, should they do this without being a citizen of another nation, they will become what is known as stateless. While difficulties vary for stateless people depending on the country they currently reside in general, many otherwise commonplace things can potentially become very problematic for those people, like getting a job, getting access to education for their kids or themselves, getting citizenship for the potential future children, ability to get married, get a driver's license, rent or buy a house, travel across borders, or even just getting something simple like a bank account. A bigger problem for some is the loss of certain legal protections that they'd otherwise be guaranteed. On this note, in the United States, the over 4 million stateless people residing in America could potentially be arrested without having committed any crime and jailed for many months, generally while the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement people try to find a country to deport them to, if at all possible. In fact, before 2001, stateless people, as well as certain immigrants in the United States, could be detained in this way indefinitely. However, that all changed with the case of Zadvydas and Davis. As a child, Zadvydas immigrated to the US legally with his parents not long after World War II. He later committed a crime and, after serving his sentence, was slated to be deported. The problem was that he was born in a displaced persons camp in Lithuania in 1948, and neither Lithuania nor Germany would claim him as a citizen when the US tried to deport him. After 3 years of being detained in this way, with no country willing to take him, the US Supreme Court ruled that the government cannot detain immigrants, legal or not, or stateless people indefinitely, even if a deport order has been secured through the courts. A maximum of 6 months for the detained period was then set. Unless it appeared removal seemed likely in the process of negotiations with whatever foreign country, then the individual can be detained longer. Even so, the fact that they can be detained on a whim at all is a very real problem for stateless people, particularly in recent times with efforts ramped up to deport certain non-citizens. As noted, Professor of Immigration Law David Baloarte said, "Many systems of immigration have the assumption that if they can't stay here, they have somewhere else to go to. Stateless people end up being uniquely disadvantaged because they can be picked up, scheduled for deportation, and then no one knows what to do with them. US immigration authorities spend a lot of time trying to remove these people. It's like they live on parole, having to live on the whim of immigration policy. When there are problems in their immigration status, a stateless person can do nothing." This said, it is possible to live a fairly normal life as a stateless person in some countries, even in the United States. For example, in the US, it is possible for a stateless person to get a work visa and therefore get employment, as well as other provisions that can be applied for and potentially, though not necessarily, granted. As another example, in Hong Kong, a stateless person can apply for things like an unconditional stay visa, which grants them some basic rights without actually conferring any citizenship status. A similar example is the case of native Russians living in the Schengen area after the collapse of the Soviet Union. For those unfamiliar, this is a collection of 26 countries in Europe where there's no passport control between their borders. What happened here is that when the Soviet Union was broken up, under the laws of the time, native Russians living in certain areas of Europe couldn't apply for citizenship citizenship in those countries, and some, for one reason or another, chose not to apply for Russian citizenship or were denied when they did go to apply. Although technically stateless, these people can nonetheless still travel freely about the Schengen area, meaning the problems with crossing borders for the stateless in their case is lessened to some degree. Alright, so this all brings us to the surprising number of ways one can become stateless involuntarily. To start with, the aforementioned example of a nation breaking up tends to see a relatively large spike in stateless people in the aftermath, generally because for some people none of the new nations will accept them, sometimes for ethnic or religious reasons, and sometimes just because records are lost or destroyed, and so nobody has the needed documentation to prove citizenship for a small subset of the population. For this reason, and the difficulty in crossing borders, a rather odd quirk of stateless people is that the majority of them were born and raised in the very place, or sometimes even in the still existing nation, that will not claim them as a citizen. On this note, it's worth explicitly mentioning here that many nations do not automatically grant citizenship based on birth location, but based on other factors, things like the citizenship of the parents, or in some cases of only one parent, which is often the father. This is rather unfortunate for the children of parents who are stateless. There are also cases where a child might not be recognized because they were conceived out of wedlock, such as in Saudi Arabia, where that child might not be granted citizenship. In other cases, if the father will not claim the child, or where the father isn't known, even if the mother is a citizen, it likewise may not matter, and the child may be denied citizenship. As another example of how a child can be born stateless, in some nations, if a baby is born outside of the nation's boundaries, such as with Cuban citizens, and the nation where the child is born will not grant them citizenship, even if the parents are both Cuban, Cuba will not necessarily grant the child citizenship. Thus, there is potential for the child to end up stateless if application for citizenship is denied, and this situation is not unique to Cuba. As yet another way some people are born stateless, this can occasionally just come down to bad record keeping or a failure of the parents or hospital to properly register the baby at their birth. Unsurprisingly, from the many ways it's possible for someone to become involuntarily stateless and to the many downsides existing in such a state, this is considered a pretty big world problem today, with it known that there are at least 12 million stateless people worldwide, with the actual figure thought to be significantly higher. In response, the UN Refugee Agency has relatively recently launched a campaign to end statelessness by 2024 and is in the process of working with various nations to try and make that happen. But coming back to those rare individuals who voluntarily become stateless, this is actually hard to do in most countries, with one of the few exceptions being the aforementioned case of the United States. So how do other nations get around this problem? As a typical example, British citizens who want to formally renounce their nationality must have either dual nationality or have provisions in place to receive citizenship from another country. This latter point is important because certain countries require you to renounce any form of citizenship before you can become a citizen of the new country. So what happens here if you renounce your citizenship but then get denied in the new country? Helpfully, in the UK, if the person renouncing their citizenship doesn't receive citizenship from another country within 6 months after they've applied to relinquish their nationality, the decision will be quashed and they will remain a British citizen to stop them from becoming stateless. This is more or less how most countries handle the situation. However, no such provision exists in the United States. If the person in question can't or simply doesn't attain citizenship from another country before the decision to renounce their nationality is finalized, they will be considered stateless and can only hope that another nation will grant them citizenship. But to sum up, renouncing your citizenship is a mildly costly, though generally surprisingly easy process that results in you losing the benefits and protections of being a citizen of the country you're relinquishing your citizenship to. It's a decision that should never be taken lightly and is usually irreversible, but is also essential if you want to become a citizen of certain foreign countries. However, with the exception of a few countries like the United States, if you choose to renounce to become a citizen of one of those countries that requires this is done beforehand, and then that country denies your application, your original country will simply cancel your request to rescind your citizenship to keep you from becoming one of the many millions worldwide that have found themselves in the unfortunate state of being stateless. Now, having just watched this video, you probably realize that your statehood is probably something you want to protect, and well, that's closely tied with your identity, and that's where Dashlane comes in. Dashlane will protect you from all sorts of threats to your identity. Lots of nefarious individuals out there, and you need to keep yourself safe online. Dashlane is a one-stop shop digital identity protection tool. It includes a VPN for all of your devices, so you can use public internet safely and anonymously. They also do something called dark web monitoring, which basically means they monitor the nasty underbelly of the web for people selling your data, and they'll alert you if this sort of thing is happening. Further, if a service you have signed up for, Equifax, Home Depot, Yahoo, Sony, PlayStation, Target, Adobe, suffers a breach, Dashlane will tell you about it right away and alert you to other services which share that username and password. We all know we all share those username and passwords between many services. This means that you can change all of those usernames and passwords so the hackers can't get access to those other sites. Smart. Plus, Dashlane does what it's always done. It stores your passwords, it keeps your personal data secure, it fills out those annoying boxes for payment info or passwords, it does it all for you. Now, a lot of Dashlane is free, but there are some premium upgrades you can buy if you want more from the service. To see if those are right for you, you can take a 30-day free trial, and after that get a 10% discount using the code TodayIFoundOut at dashlane.com/TodayIFoundOut. You can find a link below. Just go protect yourself now. Like I say, most of it's free. Premium stuff is just a little bit more. Why not try it out? Link below. And let's get into those bonus facts. Now, you might have initially thought that the sudden rise in Americans renouncing their citizenship around 2010, going from about 1,000 people per year in 2010 and then rising every year since up to 6,000 people in 2016, must have something to do with the rather polarized political climate. But it actually had to do with a side effect of trying to stop certain wealthy individuals from getting out of paying their taxes. And this is where the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act of 2010 enters the picture. Fully explaining the purpose and the ramifications of this act would take quite some time, so we're just going to quote Congressman Charles Rangel, who summed it up rather nicely. The overall purpose of the law is to detect, deter, and discourage offshore tax abuses through increased transparency, enhanced reporting, and strong sanctions. Unfortunately for the little guy, this saw ordinary Americans living in foreign countries being forced to submit a second tax return regardless of where in the world they lived and whether or not they already paid their taxes in that country. Prior to this act, if said citizens living abroad made less than $106,000 per year, they were not subject to this quasi-double taxation. It should be noted, though, that if one does pay taxes in the foreign nation, tax credits are applied by the IRS, so it's not usually a full double taxation. It's also worthy of note that the US is almost the only nation on Earth to have such a citizen-based taxation system rather than it being based on where the person lives. In any event, even if the person in question was willing to be double taxed, because of some of the rules surrounding this act, it also had a side effect of making many foreign banks unwilling to allow membership or deal with any Americans at all. So why is this? Well, in a nutshell, the IRS required all foreign banks to disclose account information, assets, etc. of any person holding American citizenship who dealt with the bank. Failure to do so would result in rather severe penalties for the bank should they wish to deal with any US institution. Thus, rather than deal with the paperwork overhead and potential to make a mistake, in the case where someone maybe has dual citizenship or the like and the bank didn't know that they had this American citizenship, many banks just choose to blanket deny service to anyone they know holds American citizenship. Naturally, many of these people, some who haven't lived in the United States for decades, decided to simply renounce their American citizenship to get around the double taxation problem and the occasional hassles about bank accounts. And now for another bonus fact. Perhaps the most famous renouncer of American citizenship because of this tax law change is the former Mayor of London and British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. While he was born to British parents, they were in the US at the time of his birth, granting him US citizenship. He'd go on to grow up in Britain, but never bothered to go through the process of renouncing his US citizenship until the change in tax law, around which time he was forced to pay the US taxes on some house he sold. Peeved at having to pay such taxes in the US for a house that he sold in Britain, he promptly paid the taxes and renounced his US citizenship. On this note, before you are allowed to renounce your citizenship to the United States, you must first pay all owed taxes. For those who make over $160,000 or so a year and have over $2 million in assets, they also tack on a rather hefty exit tax on your estate. It's also worth noting that renouncing your US citizenship also results in your name being added to a private FBI register and the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. And now for another bonus fact. There is one advantage to being stateless if you happen to wish to be an Olympian. Stateless people can compete at the Olympics as an independent athlete of no nation. In these exceptional cases, the athlete will compete under a simple white flag bearing the Olympic logo and will be assisted by the Olympic Committee to make visiting a given foreign nation to compete as painless as possible. That being said, there is no guarantee that they will be able to travel to compete in the Olympics. Though many athletes competing under no nation are technically stateless, they're usually from newly independent countries that have yet to form an official Olympic committee. And now for a final bonus fact. Contrary to what is sometimes said, renouncing your citizenship doesn't mean you can never go back. Assuming you are a citizen of another country after renouncing, you can still generally travel back to your former country under the same type of rules and regulations as anyone else from whatever country you've attained citizenship from travels under. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that like button below and don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos every day of the week. Also check out Dashlane, links in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching.